Hi, Catherine. Thank you for being here today. And I really am looking forward to this conversation, the insightful conversations that we have had often. And I'm hoping our conversation today is insightful and helpful for all the people listening to this podcast.
Yes, absolutely. No, thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to it as well.
Yes. So, Catherine, I am going to start by asking you, let's rewind a bit and let's go back to what was your childhood like? You're not an Indian, but you live in India. So,
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about what it was and what brought you to India.
Sure. That yeah, that's going way far back if we're all the way from childhood and beyond. My childhood, so I grew up in suburban Ohio, so very different from Delhi as a mega city. I had a very nice, happy childhood. I knew that I was safe, I was loved, my parents were there and supportive, but I didn't have a lot of pressure when I was growing up. I think that more of my desire to do things and achieve was largely self-motivated. It's not that I had people really kind of pushing me into lots of things, but saying, you want to do this? Great, go for it. You want to do this? It's fine. So a lot of the things that I did were sort of self-driven. And I think that's very different from today. I think that part of that is just generational, that parenting styles change, that expectations of students change. I think part of that is also a function of where you grow up. Growing up in more of like a quieter town, there's less pressure, I think, on students. There's also just different expectations of students versus when a student has grown up in a big city. And so I had a very pleasant childhood, and I think then it was a big moving from Ohio to then come to India. So I first came to India when I was 21. So and that was like my first major trip, even outside of the US. So again, I had sort of grown up traveling around the US, but not a lot of international travel, which I think for many Americans is common. And so when I came, but I knew that I wanted to come to India. So I came first for a 6 month study abroad program when I was in my junior year of college. During that time, I fell in love with the country. I fell in love otherwise too, and that's ultimately what brought me back after I graduated. But I think that it was actually a fairly easy decision for me to decide to come back to India, because when I thought about my opportunities after I graduated from college, to continue in the US, move to a big city and kind of work a 9 to 5 versus coming to India, and I didn't know what I would do, but I knew that I would figure something out. It just seemed more exciting. It seemed like there would be opportunity. And so that's sort of the condensed version of what eventually brought me to India at all of 23 years old. When
Wow.
yeah.
Okay, so I'm hearing a few things that I want to talk about a
Mm,
bit more.
mm,
You spoke about a childhood that you made you feel safe, and you spoke about a childhood where you were not pressurized,
mm,
and you spoke about a childhood where you were self motivated. Yeah, and those are the three words that sort of crept up in my ear. So, in your opinion,
mm,
now that you're a mother yourself and you're working in a dynamic where you work with students,
mm.
how important are those three factors
Yeah.
towards a child and then an adult life?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think fundamental and foundational to any, whether it's a student's success, whether it's a child's success, is for that child to know that they are safe and that they are loved unconditionally. And I mean that's more from a parenting perspective, for them to know that a parent's love for them is not conditional on whether or not they've gotten the grade or gotten the job or done this, but just because I think that it's only when a child has that sense of really fundamental security, then they feel that they can actually go out and take the risks that they can otherwise, because they know at the back of their mind that safety net is there. So I think that that's really important foundation to lay. But then it's from that you know a sense of hunger, a sense of motivation, a sense of drive can then start to grow. And so I think there needs to be a balance, both as a mentor, as a counselor, as a parent, between letting your child know that it's okay to make mistakes, it's safe, don't worry, I've got your back. But I also think that you can go out and do more and be more. I don't want you to then become complacent and just sort of relax in this cushy bed and this cushy lifestyle, but to say that if you have so much potential and capability, how can we tap into that? So then, once you've established that safe home base to say, now let's go out there and let's challenge ourselves and let's take some risks and start to do some exciting and interesting stuff. And it might be scary. That's why, you're safe back here. But let's do some sort of scary stuff. That's
So interestingly, I read something very similar the other
Mm.
day that said the job of a parent
Mm.
is to be that rock in the ocean.
Yeah.
So you know the waves are going to come. Some will come crashing at you. Some will be gentle laps that come and sort of go back.
Yeah.
But for your child, if you're that rock which says, I'm standing here, you can always come back and lean on me, no matter what's in the ocean, I think that sense of safety
Mhm.
and confidence is what really bolsters a child to take risks.
Absolutely. No, I 100%. I fundamentally agree with that because I think that really they need to know that there's a sense of stability somewhere in their life in order to then feel okay with some things temporarily being unstable and knowing that it's all right. I've got a place where I can go back, and that's why I can manage this, and I'm comfortable with this risk. The I guess the irony is that to create a child who is not risk averse, you need to create that sort of sense of safety, as we keep saying, and comfort, but then they feel emboldened to actually go out and try new things.
Absolutely. I think it's that fine balance
Mm.
that is that switch which leads to successful, happy, confident
Absolutely.
children
Yeah.
versus the ones who are sort of, they need more help to kind of
Yeah.
find their path.
And it's really interesting to see because I think that it starts very early in life. It starts with toddlers and of course, mindsets can always be changed. There's so much flexibility in our mindset, but it can be really hard then for someone to come with their 16, 17, 18-year-old and say they are so risk averse. I want, my son to go and become an entrepreneur, because that spirit starts early on. It's very hard to ask someone to then go from being very cautious and always following the rules and always doing what you've asked them to, and then suddenly saying, but now don't go work for this company and this safe, reliable path. Go create something new if they've never been challenged to do that before.
Yes. Okay. So you came from a very different upbringing and conditioning, and now you've settled well into the Indian Delhi ecosystem. What did it take from you as an individual to meander this journey?
I think a lot of good humor and flexibility and adaptability, which I think isn't just an American coming to India. I think that it is true of anybody relocating to anywhere else in the world in a new culture and new ideas. But I think in part too that it wasn't just that I was moving my American family here to America, but moving into an Indian home with and kind of really integrating into I think the social fabric as well. So adaptability, a willingness to go with the flow. I think a genuine sort of curiosity about it, because that curiosity about, but why do people say this? Why do people do this? Why, always made me then a really interested and engaged observer of what was going on around me. And so instead of it being like, "Ugh, such a drag, why do I have to do something so different?" It was more like, what fun, we get to go to this new mandir today, and tomorrow we're going to go shopping here. And so kind of treating it like an adventure. And that's still, some days I get frustrated and exasperated living in India, but most days it's a fun adventure, and I treat it that way, and it makes every day new and interesting.
Okay. So, coming from this background, how do you position it? So let me rephrase this a little bit. The world has changed. We've become a global village. Now the willingness of students to travel to different countries, to settle down in different, the Indian diaspora is all over the world. So a student who's 18 or 17 or 19, who's looking to now go and settle in a different culture, in a different environment, do you feel that you, having done it yourself, gives you an advantage to put it in a perspective which is not just textbook but is more contextual to what really they will face in the world?
I think so, because I think that, living internationally, trying to immerse yourself in a new culture and a new system goes all sorts of directions. It's not just, unidirectional. And so for students who are also moving to a new country, even if it's 4 years, for 2 years, whatever it is, whether it's the US, whether it's the UK, whether it's Europe, but I think that the type of experience of just settling in, understanding a new place, learning how to adapt to that. Absolutely. I think that that's, there's a sense of empathy for that, but also a sense of, yes, I know that it can be tough. I understand that here are the challenges. Here's how I navigated it. Here are some tools that worked for me, and they may work, as a broad sort of toolkit that you can use. I think that they may work for you as well. And so it's interesting to have those conversations. Obviously, the contexts are different, the age group, but to still see that there is very often some overlap in experience. Yeah.
So now from personal, let's move to professional. You are an education consultant by profession, and you kind of guide students in high school about higher learning opportunities. What is the main framework that a student should think about when they are considering what they should do after they finish school?
Sure, sure. I think that we want to think of it both in terms of long term goals and short term goals. So, the long term goals will be things like, where do I see myself living in the future? Do I want to be in India? Do I want to have spent some time abroad but come back? Do I think that I just want to remain in India? Do I know that I want to be out of India? So, thinking of that, because education can be a clear and direct pathway to where you're going to be in the future, what you're going to be doing. So, I think long term goals in terms of where, like you're saying, the world is really flattening. It's no longer, I grew up here, therefore I will live here for the rest of my life. People really have a lot of flexibility now, I think, in terms of creating those long term game plans of, in 10 years, I would love to be in this part of the world. Now, what can I do to work towards that goal? So, where do you want to be? What do you want to be doing? And I often advise students to not get so fixated on a single career, because careers are now changing so rapidly. So instead of saying, I want to be a banker, or I want to be a data scientist, or I want to, instead to say, I know that I like working with numbers. I know that I like working with people. I know that I'm really good with, hard work in my day. And so I want to be in a career that will allow me, to exercise those skill sets and that kind of work. But then thinking broadly about what are the possibilities, what are the options within that. And so long term, I think those sort of discussions. Then shorter term, saying, okay, if you want to be in this country, should we look at university options? There are else pathways that will allow you to get there. What kind of degrees should you be looking at that will allow you, to kind of move into these different areas that seem of interest, that align with your skill sets, that align with the kind of work that you enjoy doing. And then sometimes it even comes down to, okay, then in high school, are there certain courses that you need to be taking as a part of your high school curriculum? Are there certain skill sets that you should start to build now that are going to be important both for your college applications, but as well as for the future? So, starting from that longer destination, but then starting to break it down and say, what do you need to do in order to get there?
Okay. So as you know, I co-founded Head Start Mentorship, and the reason I found that was uh, that by the time a student reaches high school, a lot of these skills building, etc., that you just spoke about, there's often not enough time left to do all of that. My viewpoint is that students need to start having a broad, of course, not such a focused idea of what they want to do because they're still very young, but middle school and early years of high school is when they need to do a lot of this broad based skill building and some of these foundational layers that they need to add to their personality so that these future discussions become more meaningful. What is your viewpoint on that approach?
No, I absolutely agree with that. I think that by the time, those sort of middle school, early high school years are really, really precious time where students have a well developed enough sense of themselves and their interests that they can start to explore, but there is not yet the pressure of their boards and their standardized tests and their college applications, which understandably really do start to create a time crunch in their schedule. And so I think it's such a wonderful window for students to, on the one hand, be able to say, I like this, I don't like this, and I know this based on the experiences that I'm having, but to still have that scope to say, well, I've never tried that before, so let me try it out to see if it is something, because I firmly believe that. And also, by having young kids, where when we say have a bite of broccoli and they say I don't like broccoli, but like, how can you know if you've never tried it before? And so I think the same holds true for experiences as
Yes,
well.
yes. So it's very heartening to hear that someone who focuses on education post school does understand the value of an early years mentorship program. All right. Another conversation I want to have. Why is everyone fixated on Ivy Leagues or Oxbridge or without taking names, in the Indian new age colleges, some of the only Indian age colleges. Do you believe those are the only places that a student can study at, or are those the only places that everyone must aim for? What is your approach to
Yeah,
that?
yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a great question. I think the fixation comes from, it comes from low supply and high demand. So they are highly selective institutions. Most of them have acceptance rates of somewhere between 2% to 10%. And so as a result, they're highly selective, highly sought after. They do offer a great education, but I think that it can be a mistake to view them as the only pathway and the only option to, future success. There are so many stories of successful individuals who have taken alternative paths, who might have even started with those paths and discovered that it wasn't the right fit for them. And so, they deviate and they move a different way and end up being tremendously successful individuals who started from other universities, whether it's smaller colleges, whether it's public universities. So I think it serves to show that when someone is ambitious and motivated and gritty, that they can achieve whatever they want, regardless of the university. So I understand where the desire comes from because they are sort of the brand name colleges. They're highly selective. It is a great accolade to have even been admitted to one because of the rigor of the selection process. But I think that it can be a mistake for people to only focus on those. I think it can also be very stressful to students. If the student has wider goals and ambitions and the parents are really trying to narrow that funnel down to only a handful of institutions that they will deem acceptable to send their child to, I think it puts tremendous pressure on the students to perform for something that might not actually be the right fit. So fit, I think, is a really, really important word, and talking about fit with students and parents. There are some students for whom Ivy, Oxbridge, and other, similarly competitive institutions are the right fit. There are other students who will thrive in a similar academic environment, but with a smaller cohort of students, so at small liberal arts colleges. There are some students who will do much better if they remain in a setting that is more culturally familiar for them, where they can kind of establish themselves as independent from their family and then understand what they want to do, and they really go on to thrive from there. So I think that idea of looking first at right fit for a student and still then challenging a student to get into the best university that they possibly can, where they know that they are going to be academically challenged, where they're going to kind of stretch and learn and grow, but to widen that scope beyond just 10 coveted universities.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I often say to parents that, when they come in grade 8 and grade 9, and they say to me, I'm here because my child needs to go to an Ivy League. And my response often to them is, these are universities which are great, but they've also done a great job of marketing themselves. And, I'm not taking away anything from the kind of education they give, the kind of network you build, the kind of experiences students have. But then, like you said, it's not always the right fit for every student. In your mind, what are factors that contribute to a good fit for a student when they're considering higher education, be it in India or overseas?
Sure. So I think there's academic fit. There are some universities that are known for a certain style of teaching or a certain rigor, some that even have very, very strong programs in certain areas that might align well with the students' interests. And so I think looking at both the academic opportunities that are offered as well as the overall ethos and approach to education that a university takes. Then I think there's the cultural fit also. So for some students, how diverse is the university, or what is student life like? Is it really focused on students, intellectual interests? Is it focused on the sports scene? Is it focused on, going out to the latest club or restaurant? And so each student is going to be different in terms of what the student life is like and student experience. A large part of student experience is also influenced by the location. So whether you are in a major urban city, whether you're in a nice college town, whether you're in, a quieter area, and again, each student is different and is going to have a different fit. But usually when we're starting the conversation, we're looking at these primary areas, and then the conversation continues and carries on, and we might discover other things. But
Right. So this is from the student's point of view.
hmm,
From the parental point of view, when they're deciding careers for their
hmm,
students,
hmm,
as you know, in the Indian context, parental influence plays a large part in the decision making
yeah.
of where students choose to study, what they choose to study, what careers they follow.
Hmm. Hmm.
In such a scenario, what is your approach or advice to Indian parents?
Hmm. Hmm. I think I think that all of it is well intentioned. I think whatever any parent does is always well intentioned. They have their child's best interests at heart. But I think that in some cases, I see that parents' fear and nervousness about the future tends to get in the way. And so, one piece of advice is to trust your child. Trust your child when they say, "Don't worry, I've got this. I think I can do this." Again, know that you as the parent have to be the safety net, but the safety net means letting the kid actually try it out and say, "Don't worry, I'm here if you need me," but not saying, "Don't worry, I'll do it on your behalf." I think that again, well intentioned, but can be a mistake where parents sort of interject themselves before even letting their kid try it and,
Yeah.
and
So
seeing,
it's
yeah.
being that rock,
Yeah.
but allowing them to ride the wave
Correct.
and come back if
Yes,
needed.
yes,
Right?
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think trusting the student, I think hearing them out, that's the other thing, truly listening to your child. And I often see that that's where communication can break down if especially the child doesn't feel like their parents are really listening to them and hearing them. It doesn't mean the parent always has to agree. A parent has every right to say, "No, I'm sorry, you can't go to that party. No, I'm sorry, you need to do your homework," whatever it is. But they at least need to hear their child out. And I think that sometimes if a child feels like they're not being heard, that's where it can really take a U-turn in kind of a negative direction.
Can you share an instance when the child wanted to do something that was diametrically opposite or different than what the parents wanted? And an instance where it really blossomed and the child was successful, and an instant where it did not go so well, and the child had to sort of backtrack and recalibrate.
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
it's important because you don't want students and parents listening to this to think that it's all a one-way street, and every time a wild idea comes into the head, the parent must listen to it and then allow the child to act upon it. So give us instances of both, one where it has worked and one where it has not worked.
Yeah, absolutely. So one that I can think of where it has not worked. This had more to do with university choice. So I was on a call with a student and with her parents, and the student was saying, "I'd really like to apply to the UK. I'd like to, I would like to be in London." And on the call, the parents really were not hearing her and were sort of saying, "No, no, no. I studied in London. I remember what it was like. I'm not going to allow you to do the same." So not even really engaging with the child in the conversation to say, the alternatives could have been, "Okay, let's apply, let's see what happens, and then once we have all of the options in place, we'll look at it and see." Or it could have been to say, "Tell me why you want to. I'll tell you why I'm opposed to it, but let me hear you out." It wasn't even that sort of dialogue. It was just "I want to do this." No, it's shut down. And to where it became difficult later on was because then, the college list had to be completely reworked, and then she wasn't happy with where she ended up, and again had to look back. So it wasn't a positive outcome because I think that full conversation about why or why not was never really had. That's where I think it can be detrimental. That if a decision is made for a child and the child is not happy with it, they're also not going to be happy with it 6 months down the line, 2 years down the line, and so it might result in having to rehash the entire process, which is more difficult than having done it in the first place. Um, Examples of where I can think of, the conversation going well, it could be when students are, thinking about project ideas that they want to do. And a student might say, "I really want to start my own t-shirt brand," or whatever it is. And a parent would say, "I'm a little skeptical because here's what I see as the challenges, but tell me tell me what your plan is. How are you going to tackle this? Let's work it out together." And so um when I think, and that's a really good example of the student knowing that, like, my parent is listening to me and I've got their support because I can see that they're trying to work with me to figure out what their concerns are. And in some cases, a student will start on a project like this and themselves a few months in discover, "Okay, dad, mom, you were right. Was that what I was expecting? But thank you for letting me try. Let's go back to the drawing board and to your idea." Other times it might actually go well. It might take off in a way that no one had fully anticipated, and then everyone's happy. So I think that at least give, and that's another benefit going back to starting earlier. You know, if a student
Yes.
is in ninth or 10th grade and starting this, they have more time for those, for those opportunities to say, I'm really glad I did this. This is what I learned. Here's how I'm going to build on it in the future, as opposed to,
Absolutely. At Head Start, a student in grade 8 is working on a project, and midway through they want to stop, or they want to pivot, or they want to add another layer to it. And I'm like, sure, why not?
Yeah.
Because you have the time, you have the bandwidth. It's not like you're submitting a college application tomorrow.
Yeah.
And that's another benefit of why students who do these early years trainings and programs
Absolutely.
actually get value for what experiences they're sharing.
And I think that that in and of itself is also such an important life skill, because if we think about, the college application process in some ways sort of puts this artificial deadline on students that your life goal is to get into this college, and then that's it, you've gotten in, you're all set, which is not true. And we know as adults that that's not true, that life does not end at high school. Thankfully not.
Yes.
Thankfully they go on, but life is about pivoting and trying things out and seeing what works and what doesn't. And so for it to be, you have to do this and you have to stick with this for the rest of your life, is not an accurate representation of how life will be.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit of the pressure that we feel um, in our society today for our students, and the pressure that parents feel as they are navigating this journey along with their children. Do you see a lot of that? What is your sense of recreating that balance to offset the pressure? And is it really necessary to have some sort of pressure on students?
Yeah. Um, I do think that the pressure has mounted, especially in the past 10 years, for various reasons. There has always been the pressure of, I want my child to do well, but I think in when there are recessions, when economies are less stable, when people are concerned about job stability, they are even more concerned about, will my child be able to get a job? Will they be successful? Will they, and that's a legitimate concern on a parent's behalf. And I think that that often drives the desire for, again, certain colleges or certain outcomes. Which again, I would go back to the point that students can pursue many different paths and be successful. There's not a single goal to get there. But I think that is one thing that puts pressure on parents more so than students. I think students are a little less concerned about the job outcome and than a parent is. But I think there is on students increasingly the visible pressure of social media. Again, 10 years ago, people were not posting acceptance and rejection videos and putting up in a way that they do now. And so that makes, before, college acceptances and rejections, I think, used to be very private. It used to be a family matter. You would discuss it with your parents. You'd be excited, you'd be sad, whatever. Maybe you'd tell your close friends, but that was it. And now it's become very public in the way that much of life has become very public. And I think that that puts more pressure on students because they see what they feel like, my friends getting in everywhere, but it's because people post their good news and their acceptances, but not all of their rejections. But they also may feel the need to have to put their own acceptances out there, whether or not they're comfortable with it, because it's what they see everyone else doing.
In fact, I believe, not to take away from the great work that you're doing with the students and the value you bring to their whole journey, but I feel that this pressure of cocktail chatter, of social media, of where did your child go versus where is my child going, I think this has given rise to this. It's another facet of society that has evolved and has given rise to this undue pressure and this undue need to compete with the Joneses about even where your child is going to study. And in fact, and on this, I'd like, something that I was thinking about the other day, and tell me what your opinion is of this. As the world is changing, technology has made education accessible and information accessible. So, a teacher theoretically is no longer needed to give access to information, how it used to be earlier, that we could only know what our teachers or professors chose to share with us. Today's student has access to technology and information as wide and deep as they choose to make it. In this new world that we're living in, what do you see the role of higher education being for students after high school?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think access to technology, I also see it shifting a bit in terms of the high demand majors and the areas that students are pursuing. So I do feel that a bachelor's degree as a minimum is, an important criteria to have. As much talk as there is about skilling and that now all of this is accessible and available online, which it is, but I think that at the minimum level, employers look for at least a bachelor's degree in some fields, or to enter, sort of a certain I think strata within the workforce, a master's degree. So, and I think within that, it's often less that the employer is looking for, but what did you study, and more so that, like, can I see that you had the tenacity to see through your 4-year degree or your 4+2, so I do agree that a degree is important as just a certain level of showing, look, I did it, I completed this, I've made it through here. But I think that what a student majors in many ways is less it's important in terms of a student being interested and being engaged, but I think it's a skill set is really, really important. So increasingly we're seeing that, a student with an economics degree is great, but unless and until they can show that I also know how to pair economics with numbers, or a student who may have studied psychology or literature but can show that simultaneously, but I also know how to combine that with this statistical analysis tool, or I know, that I can translate this knowledge and this understanding into something that's practical, that's insightful, that's useful. I think that that really becomes the important deal, or the factor when it comes to then what are they doing after college.
Right. So, one of the missions that's very close to my heart
Mm.
is to bridge the gap between academia and industry.
Mm.
Because I believe that academic knowledge is great,
Mm.
like you just said, all the majors that the children are studying. But if you don't marry it with the skills needed to succeed in today's new world, you're not going to remain relevant. And being relevant in the workforce is what is going to ensure success today. So, when you have these conversations with parents, um, how much of this do you bring in, and how open are they to talk or listen to you on this aspect?
Yeah, yeah. I find that many people are quite open to it because it's not something that they have considered before. It's not even been a conversation that many of them have had, because so often people get caught up in the question of, but what is the most secure job path for my child, or what's, and in some ways they end up sort of with blinders on to say that, look, again, it's not that this is the one and only solution. Let's reframe this, let's look at it another way, let's talk about the fact that this job that we're talking about now didn't exist 5 years ago, may not exist in another 5 years, so we need to broaden the conversation, as opposed to it being this is the one and only option and alternative, to say, yes, that's one possibility, but how else can we look at this in a broader sense? So, and I find that when we have that conversation, one, it puts them at ease, because because they realize that it's okay. It doesn't, it's not like if you've not followed this path, you've made a mistake already, that there are many different options, and because it's not something that they had even considered before. And so then it allows us, I think, to open the conversation from one single-minded goal to, let's look at broader targets, let's look at, again, the options that can be beneficial, like you're saying, in terms of skill, like marrying skill with a student's passion, with their talents and capabilities, but then stitching all of that together.
Right. Okay. So the new student of today is a world citizen. They can choose to study abroad, they can choose to study in India, they can choose to study a vocational degree, they can choose to study the standard sort of education as it exists. Is it important to have bridging conversations in the open? Especially because of the fact that education is expensive. And while it's very well for us to sit on this podcast and talk about options and experiences and parents wanting to listen and need to listen to the new way, we also have to remember that it's a large fat fee that goes to any university or course or college that they choose to go to. So, in that scenario, as you are counseling students and parents, how often does this come up as a consideration? And what then is your advice to parents and families?
Yeah. It's been very interesting. I think, especially in the past 4 or so years. So, post pandemic, where I think people sort of reframed a desire to have flexibility and have options, to consider some options that are closer to home for various reasons. And again, I think with shifting economic scenarios, you know, work availability, job availability, it has really changed that conversation. So I find it comes up most often when we, maybe early in the process, when people are just kind of getting an orientation to it, and then the conversation kind of lulls for a bit. But then towards the end of 11th grade, beginning of 12th grade, that's when we start to have conversations about which countries, which destinations, which colleges. And there it's been very interesting to see that, you know, in the past it might have been these top 3 countries are the destinations that I'm looking at. And they were sort of the traditional ones of US, UK, Canada. But now that has really broadened, and people are now open to considering more options in Europe, within India itself, in the Middle East. So I think seeing how that has shifted, and it's both students and parents. In fact, I think that parents are a little more open to it, again, for various reasons, whether it's the proximity, the safety, financial, the job availability. But I think more and more students, as they see their friends also, you know, not going to one single destination, that there are many different places that they're going, many of their friends who then, you know, older friends who have come back and returned to India, it makes people more open to looking at wide options. And I think so, I think that we will start to see a shift too in, like you're saying, there's, you know, education is now much more available online. I think that also the institutions that are available to students are really starting to span the globe, and it's no longer just a handful of countries or universities that offer an excellent education.
Right. So there are options that exist. I think what needs to happen is for all parents and students listening to this podcast, start having open, honest conversations as families. I think that's one key takeaway from this discussion. Because if you go to someone who's an expert and say, this is what I'm feeling, these are the options, this is my financial consideration, then they would be the right people to stitch up something that ticks all the boxes rather than you know, not having. So I find as a culture, we resist open, frank conversation and exchanges. I think culturally we want everything to be always happy and always right, and that's a great frame of mind to have.
Yeah.
But sometimes I feel, especially with decisions uh, related to parenting, some honest, hard conversations are needed. As a counselor, do you encourage those conversations in your presence?
Yes, I think so, because I think that it they can be hard conversations to have, but they are better had earlier on, before it becomes something bigger, before it becomes something where people are disappointed because there was some factor that they hadn't known or understood earlier on. So they can be difficult conversations, but I think to have them, and to have them together, rather than me having a conversation with a student, me having a conversation with the parent, you know, having sort of these triangular conversations that don't really reach any conclusion. I find that if we're there together, we can reach a consensus more easily than if it just sort of keeps bouncing around.
Yeah, yeah. So, did it take a lot of learning to understand the nuances of functioning in a completely different cultural context for you personally?
Yes, as I think it would for anybody. And I'm fortunate that my husband is Indian, so I could come back to him and say, I had this weird exchange today. And then he'd be able to, he'd say, oh, I know what was happening there. You know, he could explain that to me. So I had that as a frame of reference. Um, yes, I think it's all about adaptation. Within any culture, there are always sort of funny subtleties and things that just take time and experience to understand and to pick up.
Yes. Have you ever considered writing a book on these subtleties of adjusting into the Indian culture?
I haven't. Sometimes people tell me that I should. Some of them now have become so sort of second nature that I don't even notice them the way that I would have. And now when I'll go, if it's sometimes it embarrasses me a little bit that when I go back to the US, people will say, "Where are you from? Your accent is so exotic." And I'll say, What accent?" Like it's things that I've picked up over the years that I don't even realize. Sort of.
So tell me the top three things that stand out to you, which are different culturally, contextually.
Yeah.
It could be students, it
Hmm.
could be parents, it could be the environment, it could be the work culture.
Sure, sure.
Tell
So
us some funny things.
one that I can think of, and I mean, this is both a literal but also a metaphorical one. My mother actually pointed it out to me, is children literally being hand fed in a way that they are not in the US. You know, and part of it is a function that in the US, you are running your home, you're working, so your 2-year-old has to know how to eat by him or herself. But then here she'll come and she'll see my mother in law trying to hand feed my 5-year-old, and she's like, what is it like? But I think that, again, that continues to sort of wanting a child to always feel loved and protected and feel no pain and inconvenience. And so I think that that's been an interesting one. It's, I'm still on the fence of whether it's good or bad. I think it depends on the context, but that to have that one actually pointed out to me, I think has been an interesting one. What else has been interesting? I think I don't know if I can come up with three of them right now on the
Okay.
spot, but
So I think that's a very interesting one that you just talked about. I think that comes from the nurturing. That is an intrinsic part of the Indian culture. Um, now that I'm slightly older, I also understand that that nurturing can sometimes stifle growth for a student, for a young child. And I think that balance is something that culturally Indians are learning now. And you see it with the way that strides have been made, the amount of students going abroad to study, how they are settling overseas, succeeding in other cultures. So I think that, but it fundamentally is about the nurturing of the Indian culture. And I think that's a great thing to have, as long as we don't overdo. As long as we don't overdo this. Okay. So now tell me about a little bit about the work ethic that you see. You have you have started your career very much professionally in India, but did you find it difficult as a woman and as a foreigner to find your space within the workforce in this country?
No, honestly, I found that that has been quite an easy transition for a few reasons. I think that there are certain types of work, certain lines of work where it may be more difficult for a woman, but not just in India. I think anywhere in the world they tend to be more male dominated. But I think in and around the education and the counseling space, people are quite open to it being a woman, a woman who is a counselor. And so I don't think that that has been a challenge. I think that in India there's actually tremendous support for women who want to work. More so, in many ways, I can't imagine trying to raise a young family and run a business and work the way that I do in the United States, because I just wouldn't have the same level of support that I know I have here, kind of built into the infrastructure that I've created for myself. So that has not been challenging. I think what has been more challenging, you mentioned the work ethic, and I think that people have a tremendous work ethic. They work 7 days a week, they're working till 9 p.m. And that's to the expectation that I am also working 7 days a week, which I'm not. I'm not like, I take time for my family also. So it has taken me some time to adjust to that idea of just like always on, always available, always ready to go.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I think this has been a very interesting conversation. And thank you for giving your time. Thank you for these insights. And I think, as a closing remark, what I would say is reach out. Oh, before we wrap up, let's talk about one more thing. How important is it to have access to additional help when you're navigating the college journey, when you're navigating these hard questions about careers, when you're navigating middle school? How important, in your opinion, are mentors, guides, academic counselors?
Yeah, I think tremendously important, especially as the more options that become available, fantastic, more options, but the more challenging it becomes to navigate, because there is so many factors to think about. There's so much information that's out there, and sometimes too much information isn't always a good thing. It can become, you'll find conflicting opinions and advice. So I think to have someone who can kind of cut through that clutter and help clarify not just, the information that you find on a blog or on Chat GPT or whatever is not going to be very specific to an individual. It's just what's out there online, as opposed to someone who has said, tell me your considerations, tell me your story, tell me what you're looking for. I hear all of that, and then based on the experience that I've had over the past 10 plus years working with students and families in this context, here is my professional advice. So much in the way that one can choose to represent themselves in court, one can choose to sell their own home, these are all things that you don't need to hire a professional, but if you do, it can be a lot easier because they know the process, they understand the most important concerns and how to navigate it with ease and efficiency, as opposed to having to kind of go through a lot of the
Yeah. And also, when I work with students and families, I find sometimes when you take emotions out of the picture, you're able to give or arrive at conclusions that are based on hard facts, not feelings always. You can never remove feelings when you're dealing with parents and families. At least for me, that's the case. But I feel that you become, because you are not involved in the immediate sort of emotional impact of that decision. Should my child learn horse riding or should my child go to skating camp? Should my child choose a board which is the traditional board, or should they flirt with learning with new boards? Should my child spend summer going for a fancy camp, or should my child do an internship or a summer project? I think all these decisions are questions that, when I have discussions with the parents, you look what's available, you see what the child's strength is, you see what the long term goal is, and then you kind of arrive at a decision that works best. If parents were to take that decision solely, I sometimes feel that it's based a lot more on feelings, on what others are saying, not necessarily what's the best choice for your own child. So would you agree that's the case for college applications also?
Absolutely. I think that, so often people come with a notion in their mind of, oh, we must apply to colleges A, B, C, and D because that's what my neighbor said, right? Not not based on what is going to be best, because they also don't know much about those universities and about what college life is like and the majors that they offer. So I think, again, knowing where to kind of remove the noise and the fluff and really cut down to what are the most essential considerations.
Great. Yeah. So I think this has been a very helpful conversation for all parents listening, for all students listening. And thank you so much for being here. And wish you all the very best, and hope all the students that work with you kind of raise and succeed and just continue to do great things.
Thank you so much. No, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.